Let's imagine you wake up standing in a valley that shouldn't exist. Dawn light is just starting to leak over the horizon. The air is cold and wet, and a pale mist hangs over grass that comes up to your waist. You can't see very far, but you can hear something. A low, distant rumble. You might think it's thunder rolling over some prehistoric mountains, but the sky is clear and the sound is getting faster, more rhythmic. Footsteps. Huge, pounding footsteps, shaking little ripples through the puddles at your feet. The grass ahead of you starts to sway, not in a breeze, but like something is pushing through it, straight toward you. Out of the fog, a shape rises. First, a blur of dark feathers, then a leg thicker than your arm, then an entire bird just keeps going up. 3 meters tall, 10 feet of muscle and plume, towering over the boulders like you're looking at an ostrich that's been hitting the gym for a few million years. See, this isn't some goofy cartoon emu. Its feathers lie flat and bristling, more armor than fluff. Its skull alone is almost the length of your forearm, and at the front of it is a beak shaped like a battle axe, edges catching the weak sunrise. One sideways tilt of the head, and that beak lines up with your chest like it's measuring where to hit. The bird's eyes lock onto you, round and unblinking. It doesn't look curious. It looks calculating. This thing is built to sprint, hips coiled like a sprinter on the blocks, claws digging into the damp soil. You can see where it's been testing that beak on the environment. Gouges in tree trunks, cracked bones scattered among the rocks, each one snapped like dry twigs. You might think you've stumbled into a fantasy novel or some alternate Jurassic Park, but what you actually find is way stranger. This is a reconstruction of real apex predators that once ruled parts of Earth. Terror birds in South America that hit 3 meters tall, giant moose-sized moa in New Zealand, elephant birds in Madagascar heavier than a horse, Australia with its own oversized land-stalking bird monsters. And yes, these guys are all real. For millions of years after the non-bird dinosaurs checked out, this is the world of feathered top predators. While you're imagining lions, tigers, and bears, evolution in these places basically went, what if? Giant murder chicken. And just committed. Because in your everyday life, birds are pigeons fighting over fries, chickens looking confused by literally everything, or tiny songbirds yelling from trees. They peck seeds, not skulls. They run away from you, not at you. You don't expect a bird to fill the job description of a lion. But on prehistoric Earth, over and over again, birds did exactly that. They became the bone-crushing sprinters, the ambush hunters, the shadow moving through the grass at dawn. So what changed? Why did our planet keep producing giant birds, and why are almost all of them gone now? To answer that, we have to rewind the tape of evolution and watch how birds briefly took over the world. So let's imagine you actually could rewind that tape and hit pause right after the non-bird dinosaurs check out. You might think the world would feel empty, quiet, maybe even safer. But what you actually find, a few million years later, is a planet where the new land predators are birds. Cut to South America. Open plains, scrubby forests, no big cats yet, no wolves, just a lot of nervous mammals that have never seen what's coming. Out of the grass, a 3-meter-tall shape rises up on talons the size of your hand. This is a terror bird. Some species pushed 300 kilograms, with skulls up to 70 centimeters long, basically the size of a small child strapped to the front of a sprinting ostrich. Its beak isn't for pecking seeds. It's a hooked, axe-like blade built to hammer and slice straight through bone. These things stalked the plains like feathered velociraptors, kicking up dust as they chased down anything unlucky enough to be slower than a racehorse. You, at human size, would not be the apex predator here. But South America wasn't the only place evolution went off the rails. Slide across the map to Madagascar, that giant island parked off Africa. Here the top bird isn't fast, it's just huge. Elephant birds were barrel-bodied tanks, probably 600 to 700 kilograms, heavier than any bird alive today. Picture something as tall as a person, but built like a walking boulder. And the eggs? Bigger than your head. One egg could weigh more than a dozen chicken eggs combined and easily feed a whole family. Early sailors literally treated them like portable food barrels. This is the world of birds trying their absolute best to cosplay as dinosaurs. Now jump to New Zealand. No native land mammals, just birds and a lot of forest. Out from between the trees, a shape moves that looks wrong, like a tree trunk decided to grow legs. Giant moas could stretch over 3.5 meters tall when they raised their necks, with the females actually bigger and heavier than the males, rivaling small dinosaurs in mass. They weren't sprinting hunters, but imagine these quiet, towering bodies moving through dense, cold rainforest, whole branches brushing along their backs. If one walked past you, you'd be eye level with its knees. And then, Australia says, wait, we can be weirder. Enter the dromornithids, sometimes called the demon ducks of doom. Towering, heavy-bodied, with skulls so big they look fake, they might have been plant crushers or omnivores that just ate whatever fit in the beak. Either way, you would not want to test it. And yes, these guys are all real. Their bones sit in museums. Their footprints are frozen in ancient mud. So why did different continents keep reinventing giant birds over and over? What was it about prehistoric Earth that turned chicken into a serious career path as land titan, and then took it all away? So here's the part nobody told you in school. This wasn't one freak bird family that had a bad idea and stuck with it. This was a recurring glitch in the matrix. Whenever the planet set up the right conditions, an isolated continent here, a big empty island there, birds didn't just get a bit bigger, they went full land giant. Let's imagine you zoom out on a map of prehistoric Earth. South America, terror birds, 3 meters tall, 300 kilograms, sprinting down prey like feathered tanks. Madagascar, elephant birds, up to 700 kilograms, basically walking boulders with beaks. New Zealand, moa, 3.5 meters tall when they stretched, wandering forests with 0 native land mammals around. Different places, different times, totally separate lineages. Same outcome. Huge, ground-stomping birds. This is the world of what you could call avian gigantism. You might think that sounds like a weird one-off, but what you actually find is that it plugs right into a much bigger pattern you've maybe heard of. Island gigantism. When big mammal predators vanish, or never evolve in the first place, the safe herbivores and mid-sized hunters suddenly have room to bulk up. On islands and isolated continents, the rules get rewritten, and being giant can actually be the safer option. But birds are supposed to be the opposite of that, right? Light, hollow bones, wings tuned to the gram, entire bodies built around the physics of staying airborne. Flight is expensive. Every extra kilogram is like strapping a dumbbell to a drone. So why, over and over, do birds look at that delicate, high-tech flying machine body plan and go, nah, then turn themselves into multi-hundred-kilogram bruisers that can't leave the ground? See, that's the paradox. For tens of millions of years after the KPG extinction, while you're picturing sad little mammals hiding in the underbrush, a lot of the actual megafauna striding around were giant birds. Some were apex predators, some were towering plant eaters, but they were filling the same size classes you probably mentally reserve for mammoths and big cats. And yet, you almost never hear about them. You get a semester on dinosaurs, a field trip mammoth, maybe a passing mention of terror birds, if your teacher was cool. But the fact that multiple continents independently reinvented giant birds as their main big animals, that usually doesn't make the cut. Well, it should, because it sets up the core contradiction of this whole story. How do fragile, flight-capable creatures repeatedly become continent-dominating tanks? What environmental combo unlocks ostrich but nightmare mode? And just as important, why did this age of giant birds end so abruptly that today your best reference is an angry goose? So, to really answer that, you have to dig into the exact conditions that make gigantism a good deal, and the moment those conditions flip and turn that giant body into a liability. So what does it actually take to flip a bird from cute, seed-pecking fluff into a 3-meter-tall land monster that can kick your ribcage in? What exact combo of climate, predators, food, and just basic physics turns sparrow into small dinosaur with an attitude problem? Let's imagine you zoom out on Earth right after the dinosaurs eat that asteroid. The big reptiles are gone. The giant mammal predators you're used to haven't evolved yet, and the whole planet is basically running a job ad. Apex predators wanted. Must be fast, efficient, and okay with feathers. You might think mammals instantly grab that role, but what you actually find in the fossil record is that for millions of years, a lot of the serious muscle on land are birds. So, in this video, we're going to follow those feathered giants through space and time like a nature documentary directed by a slightly unhinged casting agent. First stop, the early Cenozoic, especially South America, when the so-called terror birds step up as top predators. Then we'll jump to island laboratories like Madagascar and New Zealand, where birds get even bigger because big land mammals basically never show up. And finally, we'll watch the whole system crash in the last few thousand years, right as one very weird primate appears with spears, boats, and a taste for omelets. See, people love to throw out simple answers. Oh, it was higher oxygen. Oh, the climate was just warmer. Oh, birds just got lucky after the dinosaurs died. And yes, these guys are all real ideas you'll hear. But we're going to stress test every one of them against what the fossils actually say and what modern ecosystems are doing right now. We'll use a few flagship monsters to keep you oriented while evolution goes off the rails. Terror birds in South America, some of them almost 3 meters tall with 70-centimeter skulls and axe-like beaks, running around as full apex predators. Elephant birds on Madagascar, pushing 600 or maybe 700 kilos, basically living bulldozers with eggs the size of bowling balls. Giant moas in New Zealand, over 3.5 meters tall when they stretch their necks, quietly turning forest into salad because there are 0 native hoofed mammals to compete with them. And, as an Australian bonus level, the so-called demon ducks, huge, heavy, probably cranky herbivores that look like someone tried to turn a goose into a tank. This is the world of giant birds as a global experiment. We're going to ask, when do they win? When do they lose? And why do almost all of them vanish right after humans walk onto the scene? Because if our species had showed up a little later, there's a very real chance you'd still be sharing the planet with several species of giant, maybe even predatory birds. And the really weird part is what that alternate Earth would probably look like. So let's imagine you rewind the planet 66 million years to the worst day Earth has had in a very long time. You're standing on a Cretaceous beach. Everything is warm, loud, and full of dinosaurs. And then a rock the size of a city drops out of the sky at highway speed. You might think that's an exaggeration, but what you actually find is an asteroid slamming into what's now Mexico, turning a chunk of ocean into a fireball. Shockwaves race around the globe. Forests ignite. Debris blasts into the atmosphere, wraps the planet in a dusty cloak, and the world goes dark for months. Plants stop photosynthesizing. Food webs snap. The big, flashy dinosaurs that owned the land? Almost all of them are done. Giant theropod predators, lumbering herbivores, the whole cast. If you were large, needed tons of fresh plants, or relied on those plants indirectly, you were basically on the losing team. But in the shadow of that disaster, something else is happening. Small, flexible animals are suddenly the main characters. Things that can hide, wait, and eat almost anything. Seeds that survived the firestorms, insects chewing on dead wood, carrion from the endless piles of dinosaur leftovers. This is the world of rat-sized mammals, scrappy lizards, and very unimpressive-looking birds that just won the cosmic lottery. See, the birds that make it through this bottleneck are not the giant terror birds yet. They're small, probably still good flyers, probably ground-feeding seed and insect eaters, the kind of creatures you'd overlook today. But they have two huge advantages. They can handle a chaotic menu, and they can get off the ground when something wants to eat them. And then, as the dust literally settles, you get the weird part. All across the continents, enormous ecological job openings appear. The top land predators are gone. The bulk plant eaters are gone. Entire roles in the ecosystem, fast pursuit hunter, towering leaf stripper, mid-sized omnivore, are suddenly empty chairs in nature's office. Ecologists call these empty niches, but you can think of them as abandoned apartments in a really nice neighborhood. No rent, no current tenants, just waiting for whoever can move in first. For a while, mammals are tiny and cautious, still hiding from ghosts of the old world. The only big, fast land killers are, basically, not a thing yet. So, early post-extinction birds are flying over landscapes with way fewer big, sprinting predators. Less competition for meat. Less pressure from giant herbivores trampling everything. If some bird lineage decides to spend a little more time on the ground, eat a bit more meat, or graze tougher plants, no one's really stopping them. And yes, these guys are all real in the fossil record. Over the next tens of millions of years, in South America, on islands, across ancient plains, some of those modest survivors will start stepping into those vacant jobs and cranking the body size dial way up. Well, almost as if evolution looked around, saw all those empty dinosaur-sized roles and said, "So, who wants to be huge and slightly terrifying again?" So, what actually happened when evolution asked that question? For a little while, it basically replied, "Yeah, let's give the murder job to the birds." Let's imagine walking onto Earth in the Paleocene, that first weird chapter after the asteroid. You might think you'd see new saber-toothed tigers or giant wolves waiting for you, but what you actually find is mostly rodents, shrew things, and possums hiding in the undergrowth. This is the world of the Paleocene and Eocene, a transitional planet where mammals are still tiny, nervous, and kind of generic. They're busy being snack-sized omnivores, not yet the bone-crushing monsters you know from later prehistory. And that leaves a huge vacancy at the top of the food chain. No tyrannosaurs, no big cats, just open apex predator real estate waiting for someone bold enough to move in. And yes, these guys are all real. Giant birds start showing up and going, "Guess it's our turn." In Europe, you get gastornis, a bird that looks like someone crossed a goose with a tank. It stands up to 2 meters tall, with a massive skull and a beak shaped like an industrial paper cutter. Its wings are tiny, its legs are tree trunk thick, and it's not built for graceful flight. It's built for walking up to you and making you regret being made of meat. Over in South America, early relatives of the terror birds are quietly assembling the same basic design: huge head, hooked beak, long, powerful legs, and wings that are more decorative suggestion than actual airfoils. You might think losing flight would be a downgrade, but for these birds, it's like uninstalling the weight limit. Once you stop needing to get off the ground, you can get bigger, heavier, and much more dangerous. Ecologically, they're playing the roles you'd give lions, leopards, or wolves today. Some are likely ambush predators, lurking in forests or tall Paleocene vegetation, then exploding forward on those sprinting legs. Others probably hunted more in the open, chasing down smaller mammals and early ungulates like a very angry feathered cheetah. No teeth, sure, but the beak is a built-in axe. One crushing downward strike to the skull or spine, and the hunt is over. See, for millions of years in some regions, the scariest thing on land wasn't a mammal at all. It was a bird. That completely flips the mental picture you probably have of the age of mammals as just fuzzy things fighting each other. For a long stretch, mammals are the background cast, and the main villains stalking the ancient plains are 8-foot birds with weaponized faces. And this experiment doesn't stay small. Well, in one isolated continent, it goes absolutely off the rails, turning the whole place into a long-running bird-ruled nightmare, because in South America, those early terror bird cousins are about to scale up into a full-blown continent of terror birds. So, welcome to South America, a whole continent that basically said, what if the final boss was a bird? This is the world of the forest wrasses, better known as terror birds, and yes, these guys are all real. You might think terror bird is some clickbait nickname, but what you actually find in the fossils is a 3-meter-tall, 300-kilogram sprinter with a skull the size of your torso. Let's imagine one standing in front of you. The body plan looks a bit like an ostrich that's been hitting the gym for 20 million years. Long, insanely muscular legs, built for straight-line speed, not for dainty hopping. A stiff tail and backbone acting like a suspension system. And on top of all that, a huge hooked beak, curved down like a raptor's claw, reinforced to deliver crushing, downward blows. This isn't a pecking tool. It's a built-in warhammer. So how do you hunt when your face is an axe? You don't soar like an eagle. You sprint like a cheetah. Terror birds probably use those legs to chase down anything smaller and slower than them. Early horses, rodent-like mammals, maybe even other birds. Once they close the distance, that beak comes down in a vertical strike, over and over, like a pickaxe. One good hit to the skull or spine, and the prey is either stunned or done. For smaller animals, they may not have bothered with the whole tearing chunks step at all. Just grab, tilt the head back, and swallow things whole, snake style. You're not nibbling when your throat is wider than a human fist. And because their arms are basically gone, the entire hunting strategy is built around turning leg power into head trauma. Why did this get so extreme here? See, for a long time, South America was an island continent, cut off by oceans on almost all sides. That isolation meant relatively few big placental mammal predators moved in. No true big cats yet. No packs of wolf-like dogs. So the top carnivore job was just open. Birds stepped in, dropped flight, and scaled up until they were the lions and tigers of their ecosystem. And it wasn't just one oversized monster cameo. Forus racids came in a whole range of models. Some were only dog-sized, light and agile, probably sprinting after smaller prey in dense vegetation. Others, like the true giants, were towering heavy hitters of open plains. That spread of sizes and shapes tells you this wasn't a brief experiment. It was a long, successful radiation that lasted tens of millions of years. You might think mammals automatically make the best land predators, but terror birds are the giant, feathered counter-argument. Given the right conditions, space, time, and a lack of furry competition, birds can evolve into land hunters every bit as formidable as saber-toothed cats or dire wolves. Well, almost every bit. Because once those mammal predators finally do arrive in South America, the balance shifts hard, and the age of the terror birds starts to crack. So if mammal predators are starting to shove terror birds off the throne, what were those birds built like in the first place? To see how weird they really are, you first have to look at the standard bird blueprint you're used to. Let's imagine you pick up a pigeon. Not in a weird way, just science. Under those feathers, it's basically a flying paper airplane made of bone. The skeleton is insanely light. Thin, hollow bones full of air spaces, lots of fused sections to stop things wobbling mid-flight, and that big keeled breastbone where the flight muscles latch on like a pair of biological jet engines. You might think birds are just light mammals with wings, but what you actually find is a body that's been stripped down by physics. Powered flight is brutal. Every extra gram is a tax. Wings have to generate enough lift to haul the bird, the muscles, the food in its stomach, and even the eggs it hasn't laid yet. Go too heavy, and you don't just fly badly. You don't fly at all. So, as long as a bird depends on flight, evolution is stuck playing this harsh Weight Watchers game. Thin bones, compact organs, strict limits on how big the head, legs, and even the guts can get, because all of that has to be flapped into the air against gravity. But the moment a bird starts living more on the ground and flying less, those rules begin to crack. Natural selection can relax the no extra weight policy. Bones can thicken. Leg joints can bulk up. The breastbone keel can shrink because you're not powering marathon flights anymore, just the occasional panicked hop. This is the world of giant, mostly flightless birds. Terror birds, for example, didn't just have slightly smaller wings. They had almost comically reduced ones, while their leg bones turned into load-bearing pillars and their skulls exploded in size. Some had heads nearly a meter long, with beaks shaped like sledgehammers built to slam down and deliver bone-crushing blows. And yes, these guys are all real. See, compared to their flying relatives, they traded aerial agility for ground power. Less lift, more kick. Less soaring, more sprinting and striking. The same thing happens in other big birds. Ostriches, emus, even the heavier eagles that start to push flight to its limits all show this tension between weight and wings. Here's the pattern interrupt. Flightlessness isn't just a sad story about birds that lost something. It's a gateway drug to gigantism. Once you're not paying the energy bill for powered flight, the hard aerodynamic ceiling on body mass disappears, especially in places where big predators are rare or totally missing. And when you give that setup an island with no large mammals, well, evolution goes completely off the rails. Madagascar, New Zealand. Those places take this trick and crank it to maximum, producing some of the heaviest birds that have ever existed. No lions, no wolves, just giant feathered tanks stomping around where you'd expect big mammals to be. So, What does a world like that actually look like up close? Next, you're heading to those islands. You step off the boat onto one of those islands, and it feels wrong. Too quiet. No barking, no howling, no rustling of big mammals in the underbrush. You might think that means everything here is tiny and harmless, but what you actually find standing in the ferns is a bird as tall as you, staring back like it owns the place. This is the world of island gigantism. It's a simple but really weird rule. Take a small animal, trap it on an island, remove the big predators and competitors, and over millions of years it just grows. On islands all over the planet, things that are usually snack-sized on continents evolve into giant versions of themselves, because being bigger suddenly works better than being small and speedy. Birds are absolute pros at starting this process. They can actually fly to these isolated islands in the first place, ride storms, get blown off course, and colonize places no land mammal ever reaches. But once they arrive in a world with no cats, no foxes, no wolves, that super expensive ability to fly stops paying the bills. Why keep a massive chest full of flight muscle when you could trade it for thicker legs, a bigger gut, and a body that doesn't burn calories like a jet engine? So, generation by generation, wings shrink, breastbones flatten, feathers get more about insulation and less about lift. Flight becomes gliding, then awkward hopping, then walking, and as soon as you're stuck on the ground, evolution is free to crank up the body size, because on a predator-poor island, being huge is suddenly a cheat code. See, if almost nothing can pounce on you, the trade-offs flip. Bigger birds hold heat better on cold nights. They can afford a slower metabolism, and they can pack in a longer digestive tract to squeeze every last calorie out of tough leaves, roots, and fruits. That bulk also turns into armor and muscle. You don't need to outfly danger if you can just kick it in the face. You can watch early stages of this in modern island birds. New Zealand's kakapo is a flightless, chunky parrot that climbs instead of flies and stores fat like it's prepping for the apocalypse. The dodo of Mauritius wasn't some cartoon idiot. It was basically a supersized pigeon that had ditched flight on an island with no native mammal predators. And yes, these guys are all real. Now, let's imagine you rewind farther. Same rules, but on prehistoric islands with richer ecosystems and way more time. New Zealand scales its kakapo problem up into moas over 3 meters tall. Madagascar turns pigeons into elephant birds, heavier than half a ton. These weren't living on tiny specks of rock. Some of these islands were the size of small countries, big enough that their bird megafauna filled roles that, on continents, belonged to rhinos or even small dinosaurs. So, what happens when those giant birds get teeth in the form of a killing beak and decide plants aren't enough? That's where we're heading next. Well, if terror birds were the island's attack dogs, Madagascar went for something different. It built a tank, a feathered one. This is where you meet the elephant birds, the heaviest birds that have ever walked the planet. Let's imagine you're standing in a Madagascan forest a couple thousand years ago. You might think the biggest thing crashing through the undergrowth would be some kind of wild cow or hippo. But what you actually find is a bird that could weigh 600, maybe 700 kilograms. That's heavier than a polar bear. That's small dinosaur in a feather coat territory. These were the Aipyornithidae, the elephant birds. And yes, these guys are all real. On paper, they sound fake because your brain keeps trying to turn them into a mammal. But Madagascar didn't get big-hoofed mammals. It's a huge island, about the size of France, but with no native cows, no antelopes, No horses roaming around eating all the plants. For millions of years, those big herbivore jobs were just open. So, evolution did the most Madagascar thing possible and handed the job to birds. The island's climate was warm, plant life was rich, and outside of a few crocodiles and some now extinct big lemurs, there just weren't many serious predators on land. If you're a bird here, you don't need to fly away from lions. You just need to be too big and too solid for anything smaller to bother. An elephant bird's body plan looks like someone hit scale up on an ostrich and then kept going. Massive tree trunk legs, barrel-shaped torso like a walking oil drum, relatively small head on a thick neck because they weren't doing precision hunting, they were doing bulk plant intake. And then there are the eggs. Some were over 30 centimeters long, with volume several times that of an ostrich egg. One egg could feed a modern family for days, or one very smug predator for a week. That size wasn't just for show. When your diet is lots of fibrous, low-quality leaves and fruits, a huge gut is actually an advantage. It gives you more time and space to squeeze out every last calorie. A giant, slow herbivore body is basically a rolling fermentation tank. And if a crocodile or eagle thinks about testing you, good luck biting through half a ton of angry drumstick. Flightlessness and slow movement barely counted as weaknesses here. With few big hunters and lots of plants, the winning strategy was be huge, be calm, keep eating. This is the world of island gigantism pushed to the max. Birds not as side characters, but as the main large herbivores shaping forests and grasslands. But if birds can take over the plant-eater roles this completely, what happens when they try to steal the top predator slot too, and then meet a new kind of rival? So, let's imagine you sail past all those island birds playing giraffe and buffalo, and you keep going until you run out of continents entirely. You hit New Zealand before humans ever show up, and the whole rulebook snaps in half. You might think a lush, temperate island that big would be full of familiar stuff. Deer, wild pigs, maybe some kind of weird island wolf. But what you actually find on land is birds. Just birds and a few reptiles, everywhere, doing basically every job. The only native land mammals? A couple of tiny insect-eating bats flapping around at night, completely outnumbered by feathered everything. This is the world of the moas. And yes, these guys are all real. Not one species, but a whole squad of them. From turkey-sized forms in scrubby grasslands to absolute units over 3.5 meters tall when they stretched their necks in the forest. Some females were up to double the mass of the males, which is evolution's polite way of saying, the ladies are in charge here. See, with no hoofed mammals to hog the salad bar, moas split the plant-eating jobs between them. Some species had long necks and higher browsing ranges, stripping leaves from tree branches like feathered giraffes. Others stayed lower, built for nibbling shrubs and ferns. The smallest were down in the undergrowth, picking at herbs and grasses like weird, overbuilt chickens. If you squint, you've basically got a guild of deer, antelope, and giraffes. But all of them are giant birds, and their bodies were fully committed to this lifestyle. Powerful drumstick legs to carry huge guts full of tough plant matter. Barrel-shaped torsos for slow, steady digestion. Beaks shaped to yank leaves, snap twigs, and crush tough stems. But then you look for wings, and your brain kind of stalls. They didn't just give up on flying, they deleted the feature. No visible wings at all, just tiny vestigial nubs buried deep in the muscle, like the ghost of bird still hiding inside this walking dinosaur impersonation. Pattern interrupt. Imagine walking through that forest. You hear branches cracking and expect a deer to bolt. Instead, A 2-story tall bird head slowly rises above the foliage, stares at you with giant dark eyes, then calmly goes back to eating. Because moas were shaping the plants evolved around them. Trees grew at heights and with branching patterns that matched moa browsing. Tough, fibrous leaves, spiky defenses, and low shrubs that could bounce back after being hammered by beaks all day. The whole forest structure was basically co-designed by a bunch of giant, wingless vegetarians. But if you build a world out of oversized prey, something has to test it. Above those forests, another bird took the predator role that mammals usually steal. Haast's eagle, with a wingspan up to 3 meters and talons bigger than a tiger's claws, evolved specifically to hunt moas. So, what happens when an eagle built for taking down walking giraffe birds suddenly meets a new kind of super predator that doesn't fly at all? So, let's imagine you dodge the Haast's eagle, you dodge the moas, and you decide, fine, no more weird island birds. You head to mainland Australia thinking kangaroos and koalas are at least mammal-shaped. You might think you're finally out of the feathered danger zone. But what you actually find stomping around ancient Australia is something paleontologists lovingly nicknamed the demon ducks of doom. And yes, these guys are all real. Dromornithids, up to 3 meters tall, around 500 kilograms, with skulls the size of your torso and beaks built like industrial hole punchers. Imagine a duck that lost an argument with a bulldozer and decided to get swole about it. This is the world of giant birds, where the usual rules start to fall apart. See, a lot of the time you're told that birds get huge on little islands with no big predators, or in cold places where large bodies hold heat better. But these demon ducks? They were living in warm, open environments, in the middle of a whole cast of marsupials, crocs, and other serious competition. Australia was not some cozy, empty sandbox. So why is a land full of kangaroo things and giant wombat things also producing giant not-quite ducks? One idea is that Australia's ecosystems, especially during wetter, greener periods, were insanely productive. Lots of plants, lots of seeds, lots of fruits. If you're a bird that's already given up on flying, a giant gut and a huge skull start looking like pretty good business decisions. But were they actually predators, like feathered hippos with murder bills? For years, people looked at those massive heads and thought, okay, that's a terror bird copy-paste. Except when you grind up their bones and teeth for chemistry, the diet signals don't scream top carnivore. Their beaks aren't shaped like classic bone crushers either. Instead, a lot of evidence points to herbivory or maybe omnivory. So you're probably looking at monstrous geese bulldozing tough vegetation, not sprinting after you like a land shark. Well, that makes things awkward for simple stories, because if you can get a 500-kilogram, plant-munching, almost duck in a warm environment full of predators, then they only get big on islands, or they only get big in the cold. Clearly isn't the whole picture. High productivity, weird evolutionary starting points, and who your neighbors are all matter. And that's the bigger pattern hiding under all these giant birds. You don't just flip one switch labeled more oxygen or no predators and get an instant megabird. You stack pressures, rich food webs, safe-ish niches, the loss of flight, strange ancestors with even stranger beaks. So, to really understand why birds went full monster mode so many times, we have to zoom out and watch all those forces collide. So, if it's not just one magic switch, what about the one you always hear about? The prehistoric air was supercharged with oxygen, so everything got huge switch. You might think ancient Earth was basically a cheat code. Breathe once, become a giant. But what you actually find is way messier, especially for birds. Let's imagine you could grab an oxygen meter and walk out into the world right after the dinosaurs tapped out. You're in the early Cenozoic. Forests are exploding back across the continents. Mammals are weird little experiments, and birds are quietly plotting world domination. You check the air, and it's not dramatically richer than today. No 50% oxygen, no instant kaiju mode. See, oxygen did spike higher in some earlier eras, and that probably helped certain giant insects and amphibians. But by the time terror birds and elephant birds were on the scene, the atmosphere was in roughly the same ballpark as modern Earth. What really changed was the climate. The early Cenozoic was warm. Not nice beach day, warm. Polar forests, crocodiles in the Arctic, rainforests stretching across continents, warm. Warm, stable climates with long growing seasons crank up plant productivity. More leaves, more fruits, more seeds, more everything. And when plants are having a good time, herbivores can get bigger, denser, and more numerous because the food hose is basically stuck on high. That, in turn, means predators can scale up too. If your ecosystem can support herds of chunky plant eaters, it can also support a 3-meter-tall bird with an axe for a face patrolling the edges. This is the world of giant moas in lush New Zealand forests and elephant birds stomping around Madagascar's woodlands, turning entire shrubs into salad. The climate didn't magically stretch their legs, but it did pay the energy bill for those massive bodies. A cold, dry, nutrient-starved world just can't bankroll that kind of biomass for very long. But here's the twist. Birds already have insanely efficient lungs. Their respiratory system runs air through in one direction, with air sacs acting like biological bellows, so every breath is used almost completely. For a bird, oxygen is kind of the one thing they're already really good at. That means oxygen alone usually isn't what stops them from getting bigger. Food, space, predators, and not falling over under your own weight? Those are the real limits. So, warm climates and productive forests set the stage. They load the world with energy and oxygenated air and say, "Okay, if anyone wants to go giant, now's your chance." But they don't pick the actors. For that, you need something else to happen, like a mass extinction, a missing predator, or an island that suddenly turns into an evolutionary sandbox. So, warm, oxygen-rich worlds throw open the door for giants. But who actually walks through it? You might think the answer is always, whoever can get the biggest lungs. But what you actually find on land is way more about who gets there first and who scares everyone else away. In most ecosystems you know today, the big scary slots are already taken. The huge plant eaters? Mammals. The top land hunters? Also mammals. Bison, elephants, rhinos on one side, lions, wolves, big cats on the other. Birds are still around, sure, but they've been pushed into the side gigs. Insect snipers, seed crunchers, fish stabbers, mid-sized omnivores that steal fries from your picnic. They're successful, just not usually giant. But let's imagine you delete those big mammals. No saber-toothed anything, no cows, no antelope. Suddenly, a whole menu of ecological jobs is just empty. That's what the world looked like right after the dinosaurs were wiped out. Large predatory mammals were rare and kind of pathetic for a while, and in that gap, some bird lineages went, "Oh, cool, I guess we're the land monsters now." This is the world of the terror birds. South America, for tens of millions of years, was basically their private hunting ground. These birds hit 3 meters tall, with skulls the size of your torso and a beak like a sharpened fire axe. They weren't just big for fun. Once they started tackling larger prey, natural selection started paying out for every extra kilogram of muscle, every thicker leg bone, every more brutal downward strike. Bigger body, bigger bite, bigger meals. Repeat that feedback loop for a few million years, and you get a feathered sledgehammer sprinting after you. And yes, these guys are all real. But predators aren't the only way to get a giant bird. Take away big mammal herbivores instead, and you get a different flavor of ridiculous. New Zealand had almost no native land mammals, so its forests were run by moas, some over 3.5 meters tall when they stretched up, using long necks and barrel chests to strip leaves like living cranes on legs. Madagascar did the same trick with elephant birds, pushing them up towards 700 kilos. That's not big turkey territory. That's small dinosaur that lays eggs the size of bowling balls. See, once a bird lineage starts eating tougher plants or raiding a larger prey base, small and dainty stops working. Flight becomes optional. Wings shrink, legs thicken, and body size ratchets upward because every generation that's a bit bigger can reach more food or survive more damage. Which raises a really uncomfortable what if. If mammals hadn't muscled into the giant predator and herbivore roles when they did, would your planet today be ruled by towering, axe-beaked birds instead of lions and cattle? And would you be on their menu? So, if evolution could have handed you a world ruled by axe-beaked murder chickens, how do you actually build one of those? You don't just take an eagle, hit scale up, and call it a day. Because the first big problem is flight itself. Powered flight is insanely expensive. Every extra kilogram you add to a bird isn't just weight, it's a tax. Wing muscles have to lift it, lungs have to oxygenate it, and those aerodynamic surfaces have to keep it all from stalling and face-planting out of the sky. You might think the solution is just flap harder, but what you actually find is that muscles, bones, and feathers all have hard upper limits before they snap, rip, or overheat. So, if you want a giant bird, step 1 is, stop depending on flight. Let's imagine a population that only flies to roost or escape, not to commute hundreds of kilometers. Natural selection can start shaving costs. Wings get a bit shorter, bodies a bit stockier, and suddenly they're flight-poor birds. They can still get airborne in a panic, but it's more of a desperate launch than a graceful cruise. Push that a few million years, and the trade-off finally snaps. Flight goes from nice emergency trick to pointless weight penalty. Once they're fully flightless, the weight ceiling blows wide open. This is the world of giant moas, elephant birds, and terror birds, where gravity is the only real referee. Morphology starts to flip. Those huge, anchor-shaped keels on the breastbone. They shrink because there's no longer a need for massive pectoral muscles. Wings wither into balance sticks or display flags. Meanwhile, leg bones thicken like structural columns, pelvises broaden into load-bearing platforms, and neck vertebrae reinforce to hold up bigger skulls and heavier beaks without messing up in-flight balance. Because there is no flight. And once you're committed to the ground, being bigger suddenly pays off. Longer legs mean a longer stride, so walking or running actually becomes more energy efficient at high speeds. A bulky body can store more fat and water, smoothing over cold nights or seasonal food crashes. A giant frame can also just tank damage. A predator that could shred a duck might bounce off something ostrich-sized. And yes, these guys are all real. But, well, evolution is not giving out free upgrades. The cost of becoming a huge, specialized land tank is that you're locked into that lifestyle. You can't fly away from drought. You can't island hop to escape new mammal predators. And if your forest turns into open grassland, you're stuck playing catch-up on foot. Once the climate shifts or humans show up with projectiles and egg-stealing hands, those same traits that made you unstoppable can turn into dead weight. So, giant birds are impressive engineering projects, but they're also evolutionary tightropes. The next question is, where on Earth do you actually see evolution try this stunt over and over again? So, where do you actually see evolution go all in on the feathered land predator build? Let's imagine you're in ancient South America, looking across a scrubby plain. No big cats yet, no wolves, just hooved mammals trying to mind their business. And a 3-meter-tall bird sprinting at them like a nightmare ostrich with an axe for a face. You might think a bird that big has to be slow and clumsy, but what you actually find in terror birds is racehorse engineering. Their legs weren't dainty chicken sticks. They had long, thick femurs and stretched out tibiotarsi, the lower leg bones birds fuse for strength. That combo tells you these weren't just walkers. They were sprinters, probably hitting speeds in the ostrich range or even bigger, which is already highway speed for a human on foot. See? A long lower leg works like a built-in pogo stick. Each stride stores and releases energy, so you can cover ground without burning through all your fuel in 30 seconds. Fossils show huge muscle attachment scars around the hips and thighs, meaning massive leg muscles were anchored there. This is the world of a bird that can go from statue still to full charge before you even finish the sentence. Hey, what is that? But the legs were only half the horror. Up top, terror birds carried skulls that were almost comically oversized, up to 70 centimeters long, deep and reinforced like someone had turned a crow into a battering ram. The beak hooks down at the end, but the real weapon was the whole front of the skull, acting as a single, armored blade. Now add the neck. Those vertebrae are thick, with huge ridges for muscle attachment. That tells you they weren't just pecking delicately. They were driving the head down in a hatchet motion, slamming the beak into prey with enough force to break bones or sever a spinal cord in 1 or 2 hits. Well, if you're going to be a giant murder bird, you might as well commit. Forward-facing eyes complete the package. Most birds have eyes on the sides of the head, good for spotting danger, bad for judging distance. Terror birds pulled those fields of view forward, giving them overlapping vision and way better depth perception. That's exactly what you want if you're chasing something at high speed and need to land a beak strike on a moving neck instead of just whiffing into empty air. So, picture the hunting style you get out of all this. On the ground, they're cheetah adjacent, explosive acceleration, short, brutal sprints. At the moment of impact, they flip into eagle mode, a precise, downward strike, except scaled up to human-sized prey and bigger. And yes, these guys are all real. We're not in fantasy concept art territory. All of these tweaks show how far bird bodies can retool themselves when the ecosystem says, "We're short on land predators. Any volunteers?" But terror birds were just one version of the experiment. What happens when you take away the predators entirely and give giant birds whole islands to play with? So, you clear the terror birds off the stage and wait for the next nightmare to walk out. Claws, axe beak, something with way too many teeth, right? But what you actually find is a 12-foot-tall feathered stomach on legs, quietly mowing through bushes like a very cursed lawnmower. This is the world of the moas of New Zealand and the elephant birds of Madagascar. Both were absolutely giant, both looked intimidating from a distance, and both spent most of their day doing the least metal thing possible, eating plants. No ambushes, no high-speed chases, just hour after hour of browsing leaves, fruits, and tough stems because when you're that big, salad is a full-time job. You might think that sounds kind of inefficient. Why get bigger if you're not even hunting? Well, for herbivores, size is a digestive strategy. The larger the body, the bigger the gut, and the longer the digestive tract you can fit inside it. And a long, slow fermentation pipeline is exactly what you want if your menu is mostly dry, fibrous plants in nutrient-poor soils. Moas had deep chests and massive bellies. Elephant birds were like walking boulders with legs. All that room lets microbes break down cellulose, squeeze out every last calorie, and turn low-quality plants into usable energy. Let's imagine you're a shrub on ancient New Zealand. A moa isn't delicately nibbling a few leaves. It's vacuuming half your canopy in one go, with a small head on the end of a long neck. That tiny skull compared to the rest of the body is a big clue. These birds weren't doing complex prey grappling or precision strikes. They were bulk feeders, more like deer or moose than eagles, and in some ways they filled the same role small sauropod dinosaurs once did. Big, slow plant processors reshaping the forest from the ground up. Socially, they probably didn't live like lone, tragic monsters either. Fossil trackways and bone deposits suggest some species moved in loose groups, especially juveniles, where size plus numbers made predators think twice. Others, especially in dense forests, may have gone more solo, wandering along habitual routes, pruning vegetation as they went. You can almost picture family lines of moas threading through tree ferns, while a heavier, more tank-like elephant bird just bulldozes through undergrowth on its own. And yes, these guys are all real. We're not in children's book exaggeration land. Their weight alone, hundreds of kilograms in the largest species, meant they could kick or body check most native predators into next week. But they didn't just react to predators. They also controlled which plants thrived, where seeds were dropped, and how open or closed the habitat stayed. See, whether a giant bird was slicing meat or grinding leaves, it was plugged directly into the wiring of its ecosystem. They weren't just passengers, they were engineers, shaping vegetation, steering predator-prey dynamics, and setting the stage for what kinds of animals could live alongside them, which becomes really important once new predators, including us, finally show up. So, once those feathered engineers were in place, you get a weird question. Why were the giants mostly birds, and not the reptiles that actually survived the impact with them? You might think that after the dinosaurs ate an asteroid to the face, the next age of monsters would be crocodiles with legs like racehorses, or Komodo dragon cousins sprinting across the plains. But what you actually find is that the reptiles who made it through the Kapege filter mostly stayed small, slow, or tied to the water. Crocodilians, turtles, lizards, snakes, all hanging on, but almost none of them turning into fast, fully land-based, giant hunters or grazers. Let's imagine you're walking through Paleocene South America, a few million years after the impact. The forests are thick, the climate's warm, the mammals are still kind of raccoon-level weirdos. If reptiles were going to seize the throne, this was their shot, right? Instead, the things stalking you from the brush are birds, terror birds, 3 meters tall, with beaks like sharpened fire axes and legs built for sprinting, not waddling. See, those birds weren't starting from scratch. They were surviving theropod dinosaurs. They already had upright posture, powerful hind limbs, and a metabolism that was cranked way higher than your average modern lizard. Warm-blooded, fast processing, with big brains for balance and vision, they were basically preloaded to fill any active, constantly moving, high-energy predator or herbivore role that suddenly opened up. Most reptiles, by contrast, are ectotherms. They run on outside heat. That works great if you're a croc basking in a river or a sea turtle cruising in warm water, because the environment does half the work of heating you. But try being a giant, fully terrestrial, cold-blooded sprinter on a cloudy day. Your muscles are sluggish, your reaction time is garbage, and your hunting window is tiny. You're not ruling a continent like that. You're waiting for the sun. Birds and the early big mammals didn't have that problem. Endothermy let them stay active in cooler mornings, higher latitudes, even during cold snaps. They could chase, migrate, and expand their ranges in ways most reptiles simply could not. And birds had one more cheat code: flight. Flight meant dispersal. A small flying bird could reach a new island or a fresh patch of habitat opened by climate shifts and set up shop long before any reptile or mammal walked there. Once it landed somewhere with no big land predators and plenty of food, losing flight and getting huge was almost an evolutionary hobby. Well, that's how you end up with elephant birds in Madagascar, moa in New Zealand, and terror birds ruling South America before mammals finally scaled up. Birds were uniquely positioned, physiologically, behaviorally, geographically, to grab those giant roles first. But that window didn't stay open forever, because mammals were quietly bulking up in the background, and eventually, so were we. So, while the giant birds are having their moment, something else is happening in the background. All those scruffy little mammals that survived the asteroid? They're not staying cute forever. Let's imagine you rewind to the early Cenozoic, right after the dinosaurs are gone. You might think the mammals instantly explode into lions and rhinos, but what you actually find is a world of ankle-biters. Most mammals are rat-sized, maybe raccoon-sized on a wild day, hiding in the undergrowth while the big bird predators stomp around on top. But evolution hates leaving free real estate on the table. By the Eocene and Oligocene, multiple mammal lineages start independently bulking up. Tiny insect eaters stretch into early carnivores. Hoofed little plant nibblers turn into proto-horses, rhino relatives, and other ungulates. This is the world of mammalian experiment mode, where every branch of the family tree seems to be asking, what if we just got bigger? In places like North America and Eurasia, that question gets answered really fast. You suddenly have large carnivores with bone-crushing jaws, packs of early dog-like predators, and herds of big herbivores that can kick, gore, and trample. Once those guys show up, the land giant niche is basically locked down. If you're a bird trying to scale up into a 2-meter terror, you're now competing with saber-tooth-adjacent fur missiles that bite back. See, big mammals bring a kind of arms race that birds don't always win. Mammals can chew tough plants more efficiently, carry large guts for fermentation, and evolve crazy bite forces. Giant ground birds can be fast, sure, but they're still balancing on 2 legs with wings that are slowly turning into decorative arm flaps. On crowded continents, the giant jobs, top herbivore, apex predator, start defaulting to fur, but not everywhere. Well, remember those weird corners of the map? South America, Australia, Madagascar, New Zealand? For tens of millions of years, those are basically no big placental mammals allowed zones. Geographic isolation keeps out the classic large predators and hoofed herbivores, so birds get a much longer window to go huge. Terror birds in South America, elephant birds in Madagascar, moa in New Zealand. They're all taking advantage of a world where the usual mammal competition simply never shows up. And then the land bridge forms. About 3 million years ago, North and South America finally connect, and you get the Great American Biotic Interchange. Big cats, bears, and canids pour south. Some South American mammals move north, and suddenly those terror birds are sharing their hunting grounds with wolves and jaguars that hit just as hard but turn faster and bite deeper. Once mammals and giant birds go head-to-head in the same ecosystems, the pattern is brutal. Over time, the feathers start disappearing from the top of the food chain. But the really scary part? That decline starts before humans ever arrive. And when we finally do, things get even messier. So, let's imagine you're dropped onto the prehistoric pampas of South America right after the continents finally shake hands. The Isthmus of Panama has just snapped shut that ocean gap, and suddenly this quiet terror bird empire gets a surprise visit from the neighbors. You might think it's just a few stray animals wandering in, but what you actually find spilling down from the north are entire hunting guilds. Saber-toothed cats with oversized canines and spring-loaded spines, bear dogs that look like someone mashed a grizzly with a wolf, and early canids learning the whole pack hunting thing. It's basically a crossover episode South America did not ask for. For millions of years, Forus racids, the terror birds, had run this place. 3 meters tall, 300 kilos, skulls the size of your torso, and a beak that worked like a guillotine. This is the world of feathered sledgehammers sprinting down open plains, kicking, slamming, and axe-chopping anything smaller than a horse. No big cats, no wolves, just birds and their snacks. Now picture that same bird trying to corner prey while a pack of smaller, faster mammals fans out around it. Those newcomers have flexible spines that let them pivot on a dime, long tails for balance, and jaws lined with serrated, bone-shearing teeth. They don't just sprint. They dodge, feint, circle, and wear victims down. The terror bird is still terrifying in a straight line, but the battlefield just went 3D. And yes, these guys are all real. Fossil sites in Argentina and Uruguay actually preserve this whole mashup. Terror bird bones layered with saber-toothed marsupials at first, then with true cats and wolf-like canids later on. Early on, you see big, diverse terror birds, some towering, some smaller sprinters. As the northern mammals move in, that caste list shrinks. The birds trend smaller, rarer, and eventually vanish from those top predator slots. You might think that means the birds were just weaker, but the story's messier. Mammals bring a whole different life strategy. They give birth to live young, not giant eggs that have to sit out on the ground like a buffet. They invest in parental care, teaching hunting routes, shelter spots, even pack tactics. Lose a few adults, and the group can still raise the next generation fast. On top of that, many of these mammals are dietary opportunists. If the climate swings cold or dry and big herbivores crash, they can scavenge, switch prey, or even nibble plants and insects. Terror birds, with that specialized hatchet beak and long cursorial legs, are built for one thing: high speed, big prey, murder. Great when ecosystems are stable, brutal when they aren't. See, South America's faunal turnover is basically evolution running a stress test. Gigantism works beautifully in a calm, low-competition world. But once the door opens and adaptable, social, sharp-toothed mammals pour through, being a huge, highly specialized bird stops being a flex and starts being a trap. And this showdown on the pampas? It won't be the last time giants learn that lesson the hard way. So, if South America was evolution's stress test for giant murder chickens, climate is the part where the exam room itself starts catching fire. Let's imagine you're one of these huge birds, cruising through a warm, stable Cenozoic paradise. Forests are thick, seasons are mild, plants are pumping out food like an all-you-can-eat salad bar. Pretty easy to stay enormous, right? You might think that once birds got big, they just stayed big until humans showed up with spears. But what you actually find, when you zoom out over tens of millions of years, is the background slowly turning hostile. After the early Cenozoic heat wave, Earth starts a long, uneven cool-down. Ice builds up at the poles, seasons get sharper, and in a lot of places those lush forests thin out into patchy woodland, scrub, or full-on grassland. Still pretty, but way less forgiving. For a giant herbivore like a moa or an elephant bird, that shift is brutal. These guys are basically walking plant processing factories. You need stable, predictable greenery all year to keep a 200-kilogram body running, let alone something like Madagascar's elephant birds pushing 600 or 700 kilograms. When climates get drier, or flip from wet to bone dry between seasons, your buffet turns into a roller coaster. Some years are great. Some years, you're a 3-meter-tall bird staring at empty branches. And it's not just how much grows, it's where it grows. As forests shrink and break apart, you stop getting one big continuous habitat and start getting fragments, little islands of good habitat separated by stuff that's just meh or outright deadly. See, that's a nightmare if you're huge, flightless, and not exactly built for long-distance commuting. Populations of giant birds get marooned in different pockets, each one smaller, more inbred, and more vulnerable to one bad drought or cold snap wiping them out. Well, the fossil record quietly snitches on this whole process. Some lineages of giant birds fade out long before humans ever appear in the area. Big predatory birds in Europe and North America, giant ground birds in parts of Asia and Africa. You see them thriving in warmer, wetter phases, then disappearing as climates cool, dry, and flip-flop more often. No hunters, no fires, just habitat stress and a slow, grinding loss of the conditions that made being huge a winning move in the first place. And yes, these guys are all real. We just meet many of them only as bones in rock layers that stop at a certain point and never pick up again. So, by the time humans finally walk onto islands like Madagascar or New Zealand, the giant bird ecosystems they find are already running on hard mode. Forests are patchier, seasons hit harder, and those megabirds are living close to the edge, but not quite over it yet, which is exactly when a clever, tool-using primate is about to enter the chat. So, right as these giant birds are barely hanging on, the ecosystem gets a surprise patch update. You, or at least humans that look basically like you. Anatomically modern humans and our close cousins start fanning out of Africa, and in geological time it's basically overnight. Within the last 60,000 years, we're suddenly popping up in Australia, then on Madagascar, then way out in New Zealand. Let's imagine you're one of those first people stepping onto a New Zealand beach at dawn. No dogs, no big cats, no land mammals at all, actually. The forests are quiet, until a 3-meter-tall moa strolls out of the trees and just kind of looks at you. You might think it would bolt like a modern deer, but what you actually find is a bird that's evolved for millions of years with no idea what a human-style predator even is. See, humans don't just show up as another hungry animal. We're a full super predator expansion pack. Cooperative hunting, complex language, stone blades, fire, and this weird brain that can test new strategies in hours instead of waiting for evolution to do it over 1,000,000 years. One group can experiment on seals, another on shellfish, another on giant birds, and everybody shares notes. And yes, these guys are all real. Early settlers in New Zealand leave behind piles of moa bones with clean-cut marks from stone tools. In Madagascar, the same story plays out with elephant birds that could weigh over 600 kilograms. Archaeologists find eggshells from these things, eggs bigger than a basketball, with burn marks and heat-cracked surfaces, exactly what you'd expect if people are roasting them on campfires. From the bird's perspective, this is a horror movie playing on fast forward. Giant, flightless species, like moa or elephant birds, had spent their entire history dealing with slow, four-legged threats, or none at all. An upright biped walking calmly toward you? Not a problem. It doesn't trigger that deep, wired-in panic response because nothing that shape ever tried to kill you before. By the time the spears come out, it's too late. Kill sites in New Zealand show mass processing of moa carcasses, sometimes dozens at a single spot. Eggshell fragments are scattered in caves and dunes, suggesting people weren't just hunting adults, they were strip mining the next generation before it even hatched. You get the same pattern on islands across the world. Humans arrive, cut-marked bones and burned eggshells appear, and the giant birds vanish on a timescale of centuries, not millennia. So, here's the uncomfortable question. Were we just the last shove for megabirds already living on hard mode? Or did a few thousand clever primates walk into thriving feathered empires and delete them almost instantly? And if we did it that fast once, what does that say about the power we're swinging around today? So, let's imagine you actually could watch that delete process in real time. No asteroid, no supervolcano. Just a few thousand hungry humans stepping off boats into a world of giant, clueless birds that have never seen a primate with a sharp stick. You might think it would take armies and industrial weapons to wipe out something like a 250-kilogram moa or a 700-kilogram elephant bird. But what you actually find, when you run the numbers, is that big, slow breeders are terrifyingly easy to crash. These birds lived on island time. Long lives, few chicks, lots of parental investment. If adult survival dips just a little, the whole system faceplants. See, if you're a moa, your whole strategy is don't die. You take years to mature, you lay a small clutch, and you hope almost every adult survives each cold winter. A 5 or 10% bump in adult mortality? That's not a bad year. That's population freefall. And early humans are really good at turning a few extra deaths into none left in 400 years. Well, who do those first hunters go for? The biggest individuals, the tallest moas, the heaviest elephant birds, the ones that give you the most meat per spear throw. They're also the most naive, because nothing on those islands had been hunting them at our level of coordination. No fear of bipeds, no flight response to stone tools. You walk up, you throw, dinner falls over. Pattern interrupt. You might think the real damage is all that roast drumstick. But the real extinction weapon is breakfast. Each giant egg is basically a condensed bird. For an elephant bird, you're talking about an egg bigger than a volleyball, with the volume of dozens of chicken eggs. That's an enormous energy investment for the parent. If people start treating those as portable food caches, even just taking a fraction of clutches every year, you gut recruitment. Chicks never get a chance to replace the adults you're already picking off. And then humans do something no other predator does. They start editing the landscape. This is the world of firestick farming, where you burn patches to clear travel routes, flush prey, or encourage certain plants. Looks great for people. For giant birds that need intact forest for nesting, or specific shrubs and wetlands for feeding. It's like someone is deleting pieces of their map at random. Nesting sites burn. Feeding grounds fragment into little isolated pockets. Adults have to walk farther, risk more, just to find food and safe places to lay those few precious eggs. So now you've stacked hunting, egg theft, and habitat loss on top of already slow life histories. And yes, These guys are all real victims of that combo. In New Zealand, cut-marked moa bones pile up right after humans arrive. In Madagascar, elephant bird eggshells show up in cooking fires. A few centuries later, silence. They're gone. So when you zoom out, it stops being a mystery. Give a small human population sharp tools, fire, and a taste for omelets, and a continent's worth of megabirds can vanish between one set of grandparents and the next. But was this a one-time island tragedy, or part of a bigger global pattern where anything giant and slow is living on borrowed time? So, to see just how not hypothetical this is, you don't have to go back to the age of dinosaurs. You just have to sail over to Madagascar, about 1,000 years ago. Let's imagine you're walking through a tropical forest at night, torch in hand. You might think the biggest thing you'll bump into is a lemur, or maybe a wild pig. But what you actually find is a shadow the size of a small car moving between the trees. That's not a mammal. That's an elephant bird. These things weren't ancient in the 65 million years ago sense. The largest species, like Varambe titan, probably survived until at least 1,000 to 1,500 years ago. While people in Europe were copying manuscripts in monasteries, and cities in Asia and the Middle East were writing detailed histories, Madagascar still had birds weighing over 600 kilograms just walking around. Same planet, same century. And yes, these guys are all real. We're not just talking about a few mystery bones. You get cut-marked elephant bird bones in archaeological sites, where stone tools scraped meat from legs thicker than your torso. You get eggshell fragments in ancient hearths, burned and broken, from eggs that were bigger than a basketball and could have fed an entire family. You even get local legends of giant birds and monster eggs that sound suspiciously like cultural memories of the last survivors. See, once humans show up on Madagascar, the story stops being a cozy island fairy tale. You get hunting, obviously. If you're a hungry farmer and you find a bird that can't fly and lays a huge egg, that's basically a walking pantry with a built-in cookware section. But it doesn't stop at omelets. People start cutting and burning the forests. Slash-and-burn agriculture opens fields for crops, and the mosaic of dense forest and open woodland that elephant birds used gets shredded into isolated patches. At the same time, humans bring in cattle, goats, and other livestock. Those new animals chew through the undergrowth, trample nesting sites, and compete for the same fruits and leaves. The island's giant birds are suddenly sharing their buffet with a crowd that never evolved to play nice. And elephant birds are built for stability, not chaos. They grow slowly. They probably lay very few eggs each year. When you're that huge, you can't just crank out a dozen chicks and hope a couple make it. So, a little extra hunting pressure here, a few key nesting areas burned there, some food plants overgrazed by goats, and their numbers don't just dip, they crash. Within a few centuries of serious human presence, they're gone. One moment, Earth still has birds as heavy as small cars stalking through warm, humid forests. The next, that entire branch of the tree of life just stops. And it raises a bigger question. If something that massive and established can vanish that fast, what does that say about the other giants we still have left today? So, if giant birds can blink out that fast, what does it actually look like on the ground when it happens? Let's imagine you step off a canoe onto New Zealand about 800 years ago. No farms, no cities, just dense, dripping forests. And birds. Huge birds. This is the world of the moa. Polynesian settlers, the ancestors of today's Maori, arrive around the 13th century CE after crossing thousands of kilometers of cold, open ocean. You might think they'd find wolves, big cats, maybe some weird island mammal trying to be a deer. But what you actually find is an ecosystem where the biggest things walking around are feathered. Up to 9 species of moa, some stretching over 3.5 meters tall when they crane their necks, basically own the landscape. And the top land predator? Not a mammal, a giant eagle. Haast's eagle, with a wingspan up to 3 meters, talons like a tiger's claws, and a lifestyle built around dropping onto unsuspecting moas from above. And yes, these guys are all real. For millions of years, this bird-on-bird arms race runs without a single native land mammal to shake it up, which is exactly the problem when humans walk in. Moas have evolved with no mammalian predators at all. No dogs, no big cats, not even rats before people bring them. So they don't see a standing human with a spear as a threat. They see just another tall, slow thing. That means you can walk right up, drive them into traps, or run coordinated hunting drives where entire groups funnel panicked moas into narrow valleys. Archaeologists have literally dug up the receipts for this overkill. Huge kill sites, packed with thousands of moa bones, stacked in layers, show up along ancient camp areas. You get piles of leg bones smashed for marrow, charred vertebrae from roasting, cut marks on ribs where meat was stripped off, and carefully broken long bones turned into tools, fish hooks, even jewelry. Skins and feathers were probably used for cloaks, tendons for cord. If a moa could be turned into something, people did it. Now add one more fatal design choice: slow reproduction. Moas likely laid just 1 or a few eggs a year, with long childhoods and a strategy built around safe, stable conditions. That works fine when your only real worry is a predictable eagle you've co-evolved with. It fails instantly when you suddenly have organized hunters hitting every valley, every season, year after year. The math doesn't care how giant you are. Adults are removed faster than chicks can grow up. Within roughly 200 to 300 years of human arrival, every moa species is gone. Haast's eagle, whose whole business model is eat moas, loses its food base and crashes too. One predator, one prey, both erased in a couple of human lifetimes. So if an entire giant bird world can vanish that fast, what happens when you scale this story up to a whole planet full of megabirds? So, if New Zealand can lose an entire moa-based food web in a couple centuries, what happens on a whole continent where the giant birds have been around for tens of millions of years? Let's imagine you're in Australia, 50,000 years ago, walking through open woodland, and something the size of a small car is glaring at you with a beak like a shovel. That's a dromornithid. These demon ducks of doom weren't some brief evolutionary stunt. They show up in the fossil record way back in the Miocene. They ride out cooler phases, warmer phases, shifting forests and grasslands, and they just keep going. You might think that if climate alone could kill them, it would have done it during one of those earlier swings. But what you actually find is they hang on through all of that, and then vanish roughly 40 to 50,000 years ago, which is, awkwardly, right when humans show up. At the same time, Australia itself is changing character. The late Pleistocene is getting drier, more variable, and generally less friendly to anything that needs a lot of food and water. Lakes that were once permanent start shrinking or blinking out. Woodlands thin into scrub. Huge, plant-eating or omnivorous animals like dromornithids suddenly have to walk farther between patches of green, and every drought hits harder than the last. Now, if you're already a stressed giant bird trying to scrape together enough calories, you really don't want a brand new predator that can throw spears. Early humans in Australia probably weren't seeing dromornithids on every hillside. Even low hunting pressure on adults, plus people raiding eggs, can push a slow-breeding giant over the edge because the population doesn't bounce back quickly. And yes, these guys are all real. We're talking birds that may have weighed 500 kilograms trying to keep up in a drying landscape while something with a sharp stick learns how tasty drumsticks can be. Here's the pattern interrupt. It's not just about spears. Humans also change fire. See, when you start burning more often to clear land or drive game, you can flip mosaics of forest and woodland into more open, fire-tolerant scrub. That might help some smaller grazers, but it can wipe out the specific mix of plants a giant browser depends on. So you've got climate making everything drier, fire reshaping habitats, and hunting shaving off adults and eggs at the same time. Scientists still argue about the exact recipe. Was it mostly climate? Mostly humans? Some studies lean harder on droughts and lake records. Others point to timing and butchery marks. But lining up the dates, it looks less like a slow, natural fade-out and more like a 1-2 punch. Climate weakens the demon ducks. Humans finish the job. And this is where it gets eerie. Because across 3 totally different land masses, Australia's demon ducks, New Zealand's moas, Madagascar's elephant birds, the storyline keeps repeating. Giant, flightless birds rule for ages. Humans arrive, and the giants don't walk away. So after all that extinction carnage, you're probably wondering, is that it? Are the giant birds gone for good? Or could evolution, given enough time and a little peace and quiet, actually build another multi-meter-tall feathered tank to stomp around the landscape? You might think the answer is a hard no. We've got cars, cities, and house cats on every continent. Not exactly perfect terror bird conditions. But what you actually find, if you zoom out, is that the basic recipe for giant birds is still very much lying around the kitchen. You still have flying birds that can hopscotch between islands. You still have islands that occasionally end up weirdly short on big land predators. And you still have that classic bird move. Once flight becomes optional, body size starts creeping upward. Let's imagine a predator-free island pops up in the middle of the ocean and stays pretty stable for a few million years. A flock of perfectly normal, crow-sized birds blows in during a storm. At first, flight is everything. They need it to find food, escape each other, avoid the odd visiting raptor. But as generations pass and big threats stay rare, wings become less life or death and more expensive luxury feature. Lose a bit of wing, gain a bit of leg, get heavier, get tougher, save energy by not flying all the time. We actually see this process in miniature right now. Rails on islands like Guam and New Caledonia keep evolving toward flightlessness and bigger bodies whenever predators are kept out. And yes, these guys are all real. They're not elephant birds, but for a rail they're chunky. On continents, you've got ostriches, emus, and cassowaries already halfway down the road. Huge, fast, mostly or totally flightless, doing that "I'm basically a dinosaur with opinions" thing. So, what's stopping them from going full terror bird and taking over? Well, us. Humans are now the universal background predator. We bring dogs, cats, pigs, and rats to islands that used to be safe bird laboratories. We fragment habitats, drain wetlands, burn forests, and build roads right through the places where a slow-breeding giant would need calm, stable conditions to evolve. You don't get a 3-meter apex bird if every few thousand years the entire ecosystem gets reset by people. See, gigantism is a long game. You need millions of years of nothing too crazy happens for natural selection to keep stacking on size. Modern Earth is the opposite of that. It's noisy, fast, and constantly disturbed. So yes, small-scale island gigantism in birds still pops up. Bigger ducks here, oversized rails there, weird chunky parrots in New Zealand. This is the world of mini giants, not continent-crushing monsters. Could that change? Only if we vanish, or at least stop being an ecological wrecking ball for a very long time. Give the planet a few quiet million years, pull humans out of the picture, and those same rules that built terror birds and moas are still waiting. And the really wild part is what might evolve to fill that empty top predator slot instead. So if the job opening for giant feathered land monster is still posted, who's actually applying right now? You don't have terror birds stalking continents anymore, but what you actually find are their much smaller, slightly less horrifying cousins still walking around with us. Let's imagine you're in Africa, standing eye to knee with an ostrich. This thing is already ridiculous. Up to around 150 kilograms, legs like spring-loaded baseball bats, and a brain that's doing its best. You might think, why don't they just keep scaling up until we get a new elephant bird? But in today's predator-rich, human-dominated world, ostriches are already flirting with the upper limit for a bird that has to sprint away from lions, cars, and people with spears. See, once you're that big, every extra kilogram makes acceleration harder, turning you from fast prey into slow buffet. Modern ecosystems are crowded with mammal predators and, increasingly, humans, so the safe zone for a giant runner is actually pretty tight. Big enough to kick a hyena into next week, but not so huge you trip over your own ankles trying to escape a truck. And ostriches aren't alone. This is the world of retites, emus thundering across Australia, cassowaries in tropical forests that look like velociraptors in a bike helmet, rheas patrolling South American grasslands, and kiwis sneaking around New Zealand like nocturnal feathered potatoes. And yes, these guys are all real. They're the scrappy leftovers of a once-way more diverse clan of large, mostly flightless birds that never quite hit elephant bird size, but still push what a modern bird body can get away with. But if you really want to see evolution go off the rails fast, you go to islands. Think of the dodo on Mauritius. In just a few million years, a normal pigeon relative lands on a predator-free island, loses flight, bulks up, and turns into a chunky ground-dwelling bird that absolutely no one designed for surviving sailors. Same story with the kakapo in New Zealand, a flightless, nocturnal, giantish parrot that waddled its way into being because nothing was trying to eat it. Until, well, we showed up with cats and rats. You might think that kind of rapid size jump is ancient history, but what you actually find on some tiny islands today is rails and other small birds quietly replaying the prologue to the moa story. Lose the hawks and cats, and suddenly wings shrink. Legs get sturdier. Bodies get a bit bigger. Not giant yet. Just trending. The wild part? Those are the same early steps that once led to 3-meter moas and half-ton elephant birds. The evolutionary machinery is clearly still humming along. It's the ecological context that's slammed on the brakes. So what happens if those brakes ever come off again? Well, we already know how your brain reacts, because you've met giant birds before, just not in real life. Let's imagine you're sitting around a fire a few thousand years ago. Overhead, you've got real eagles, cranes, vultures. Big, sure, but not nightmare big. Yet the stories people tell? Rocks big enough to carry off elephants, thunderbirds that snatch canoes out of lakes, the simurgh, this ancient Persian megabird that's basically a flying mythological Swiss army knife. You might think that's pure fantasy, but what you actually find is that these legends show up in places that also had huge bird fossils, or memories of outsized eagles and vultures circling real megafauna. See, your brain is used to birds being small, twitchy, and mostly harmless. Pigeons. chickens, ducks, background animals. When you scale that template up to "can carry you away," it hits the uncanny button hard. Suddenly, you're not the observer anymore. You're potential prey. A beak stops being cute and starts looking like a bolt cutter. Talons go from "aw, little feet" to "that's 4 knives on each toe." Your nervous system doesn't care that it's just a scaled-up pigeon. It's running the same predator-prey software that once watched the sky for actual giant raptors. And birds are uniquely weird for this because they live in 2 mental folders at once. On one side, domestic, goofy, kind of dumb. Chickens pecking at corn, ducks waddling after bread. On the other, raptors with hooked beaks, laser-focused eyes, and feet designed to crush bone. Blow up a tiger and you just get a bigger tiger. Blow up a chicken and now you've got this familiar, slightly ridiculous body plan welded to dinosaur hardware. It feels both relatable and monstrous at the same time. Modern media absolutely milks that. This is the world of giant CGI terror birds sprinting down highways in disaster movies, mutated ostriches in low-budget horror, and speculative documentaries quietly whispering, "And yes, these guys are all real," while a 3-meter forest wrassid slams its axe beak into some poor mammal. Pattern interrupt. You're watching what looks like a cozy farmyard scene. And then the camera pulls back and the hen is taller than a car. Nature out of balance. Ancient worlds intruding on the present. That's the vibe. So, why are we so obsessed? Because giant birds are a reminder that Earth used to run on a different default setting. Our modern ecosystems, with their medium-sized songbirds and politely distant eagles, are just one version of the planet. When you picture a moa towering over you, or an elephant bird egg bigger than your head, you're not just imagining a big animal. You're getting a glimpse of how strange the rules of life can be when nothing hits the brakes at all. So, here's the twist you've probably felt coming. Those moas and elephant birds you've been picturing. You're not just imagining big birds. You're looking at the last generation of giant dinosaurs walking around in plain sight. Let's imagine you could peel back the feathers on a moa skeleton and stand it next to a small theropod from the Jurassic. Same basic blueprint. Long, powerful legs, hollow bones, 3-toed feet, a center of mass balanced over the hips. You might think birds are this cute, separate group that showed up after dinosaurs were done, but what you actually find is that birds are dinosaurs. Technically, they're avian theropods, which means elephant birds, moas, and those South American terror birds? Giant dinosaurs, in every meaningful evolutionary sense. See, once you swallow that idea, the whole timeline of Earth gets weirdly blurry. We like to split things into a dinosaur age and a mammal age, as if someone flipped a switch 66 million years ago and swapped the cast. But the dinosaur body plan didn't just vanish when the non-avian forms died in the cold dark after the asteroid. It kept going, scaled down into birds that then scaled right back up whenever the world gave them room. For tens of millions of years, a lot of land ecosystems still had dinosaur-style players in charge. Terror birds in South America reached almost 3 meters tall, with skulls the size of your torso and beaks shaped like axe blades. They ran on 2 legs, like a raptor that traded claws for a stabbing face. This is the world of feathered apex predators, sprinting after mammals instead of the other way around. And it wasn't just the hunters. On islands like New Zealand and Madagascar, huge herbivorous birds basically replayed the old sauropod job, just in a lighter, feathery version. Moas, over 3.5 meters tall, stretched up into forest canopies. Elephant birds in Madagascar pushed 600 kilos or more, stomping through vegetation and swallowing fruits whole. They were shaping plant communities, moving seeds, and rearranging food webs the way big plant-eating dinosaurs once did. Different era, same dinosaur logic. Well, that makes their final disappearance hit a lot harder. When most of these giant birds vanish in just the last few tens of thousands of years, it's not only the loss of some cool, oversized ostrich cousins. It's the quiet end of the last truly dinosaur-like megafauna on land. After that, the biggest things roaming around with a dinosaur body plan are us looking at fossils. So, next time you see a pigeon dodging traffic or a chicken pecking at crumbs, you're watching the shrunken, urban-adapted leftovers of a lineage that once produced continent-dominating giants. The age of dinosaurs didn't really end. It just got small, anxious, and very, very good at living next to humans. So, if modern birds are the anxious, subway-riding leftovers, what do their giant cousins actually tell you about how evolution works? Let's imagine you zoom out from any one species and look for patterns. You might think giant birds were just rare, one-off freak accidents. But what you actually find is the same basic body plan popping up again and again on different continents, in different eras. This is the world of convergence. Terror birds in South America, elephant birds in Madagascar, moas in New Zealand, even oversized geese things in Europe. Totally separate lineages, no shared giant bird ancestor, all independently stumbling into the same solution: get huge, lose flight, own the ground. Why? Because the conditions rhyme. Few or no big mammal predators, lots of plant food or slow, squishy prey, wide open ecological jobs nobody's filling. That's ecological release in action. Take away constraints, like saber-toothed cats, big monitor lizards, or packs of dogs, and suddenly being a 300-kilogram bird isn't a death sentence. On Madagascar, with no native big land mammals, elephant birds could balloon past half a ton. In New Zealand, moas turned forests into an all-you-can-eat salad bar. Traits that would usually get you instantly eaten, like being slow to mature or nesting on the ground, stop being such a big problem. But evolution never gives free upgrades. It does trade-offs. You want a giant, power-lifting body? You're paying with flight. Wings shrink into balance poles. Breastbones flatten. Hollow bones get thicker so they don't snap. These birds gain raw kicking power and size, but they lose agility, escape options, and that last-minute, just fly away button when things go bad. And when the world changes fast, those trade-offs turn brutal. A drought hits. A new predator shows up. Or, humans arrive with fire and pointy sticks. The same slow growth and low reproductive rate that worked fine in a quiet, stable world suddenly means you can't replace adults as fast as they're vanishing. Giants are impressive, but they're also fragile in a way pigeons are absolutely not. See, this is where evolution's vibe really shows. It's not goal-directed. Birds didn't want to become terror birds or elephant birds. They just followed whatever genetic tweaks made them leave more offspring in that exact time and place. If that meant turning into a land-bound, axe-beaked sprinter, cool. If later that same design became a liability, evolution didn't rescue them. It just moved on to whoever could cope. And yes, these guys are all real, which means the rules that shaped them are still in play. So, if you know that empty islands, plus no predators, plus abundant food, tend to spit out giant, flightless things, you can start predicting where the next wave of weirdness might evolve. But what happens when we start ripping those conditions away faster than evolution can keep up? So, What happens if you pull the plug on the whole mess we just created? Let's imagine a far future where humans are gone, our cities are crumbling, and the last plastic bags are finally shredding into the dirt. The cows, cats, and chickens you left behind? Most of them are either gone or feral, folded back into this weird patchwork of recovering forests, empty suburbs, and half-collapsed farms. You might think that without us, mammals just march right back into the giant slots. Wolves become dire wolves again, rats become capybaras with an attitude, and birds just stay birds. But what you actually find, if you fast forward a few million years, might look a lot more feathered and a lot more unsettling. Because some of the birds you see today are basically pre-approved for the Future Giant program. Crows and ravens already solve puzzles, use tools, and happily eat almost anything. Gulls raid landfills, fishing boats, and your fries. Pigeons have turned concrete canyons into cliff faces and figured out how to live off our crumbs. Take away the skyscrapers and the French fries. Give them a few 100,000 years of new forests, new shorelines, and no humans chasing them with brooms. And those clever generalists could easily get bigger, bolder, and more terrestrial. But they've got competition. Look at turkeys, geese, swans, and those slightly unhinged farmyard geese that already act like they own the place. They're heavy, semi-flightless in the real world already, and built around walking, grazing, and bullying anything smaller than a car. This is the world of almost giant birds just waiting for the right opening. Remove our fences and guns, let big mammal predators crash in some regions, and you've basically recreated the job posting that moa and elephant birds answered. And on islands, things get even weirder. See, if humans vanish and the rats, cats, dogs, and pigs we dragged onto islands with us also fade out, you reset the game board that produced the dodo, the moa, and all those giant rails and parrots. Give an island a few million years with no big land predators, plenty of plants, and some mid-sized birds, and you almost expect flight to start looking optional again. Wings shrink, legs thicken, beaks scale up. Suddenly, you've got a knee-high pigeon that can't fly but can kick. Pattern interrupt. That future terror bird might be standing in a ruined parking lot, hunting feral goats between sapling trees growing through cracked asphalt. Any new giants would be shaped by warmer climates, shuffled seasons, invasive plants we left behind, and weird nutrient cycles from our buried landfills and farm soils. They'd echo the past, but they wouldn't be copies. So evolution doesn't hit rewind, it hits remix. Similar pressures keep nudging bodies towards similar solutions. And in some corners of that post-human Earth, that solution might once again be a giant bird stalking the land, riding a brand new age of feathers over our ruins. So, let's imagine you rewind that remix we just talked about and play it from the top. What actually let birds get this absurdly big in the first place? Why did the planet, over and over, say yes to giant feathered tanks and no to keeping them small and polite? See, when you line up our star players, a pattern pops out fast. In South America, you've got terror birds, 3 meters tall, skulls the size of your torso, acting like lion stand-ins on a continent where big cats and wolves just weren't a thing yet. On Madagascar and New Zealand, you have elephant birds and moas, giant herbivores lumbering around forests and shrublands, filling the jobs that deer, antelope, or even rhinos might take elsewhere. And then over in Australia, the demon ducks, these huge, possibly omnivorous battering rams, doing their own warm climate experiment in bird gigantism. And yes, these guys are all real. You might think each of those stories is a one-off. South America was weird. Islands are weird. Australia is always weird, right? But what you actually find is that they were all playing with the same rulebook. First page, big mammals either never show up or they're late to the party. Second page, serious mammalian predators are missing or limited. Third page, the environment is relatively stable and productive for a long time, with enough food to keep a giant bird body running. Once those conditions click into place, the evolutionary pathway is surprisingly consistent. Start with a bird that can fly. Then, slowly, flying stops being worth the cost. Wings shrink, breastbones flatten, legs get thicker. That's flight reduction. As soon as they're not chained to the sky, they get what biologists call ecological release. Suddenly, they can step into all these open jobs on the ground. Predator, grazer, browser, giant seed crusher. And once that happens, selection starts pushing them bigger and bigger, because a larger body kicks harder, reaches higher, scares rivals, and shrugs off the occasional bite. Give that process a few million years, and you end up with highly specialized, giant, flightless forms. A terror bird with an axe beak tuned for bone crushing. A moa with a neck like a periscope, vacuuming leaves above every other herbivore. A demon duck that looks like evolution mashed goose and bulldozer together as a joke. But this is the world of temporary advantages. The same pattern that built them also set up their fall. As large mammals spread and diversified, they started competing for the same food, or just eating the birds outright. Long-term climate shifts made some habitats drier, poorer, or more seasonal, which is bad news when your strategy is be huge and need a lot of snacks. And then humans arrive, and everything goes into fast forward. Hunting, burning, egg raiding, whole lineages erased in a geological blink. So, giant birds aren't just proof that evolution can get really creative. They're proof it's fragile. When the rules change, even the biggest feathered experiments can vanish. The real question is, what does that say about our own moment and the giants we're still living with now? So, what does it actually feel like to live in the ruins of an age of giants? Because that's what you're doing right now. You just don't usually see it. Let's imagine you're walking through a tropical forest, looking at some random tree with these huge, glossy fruits. You might think, cool, that's for monkeys or parrots. But what you actually find is, nobody really eats them properly. The seeds are too big for most birds. The fruit drops, rots, and kind of limps through its life cycle. It's like the plant is still waiting for a customer that never shows up. See, a lot of plants evolved with megafauna partners. Giant mammals, yes, but also giant birds. Oversized fruits, rock-hard rinds, ridiculous thorns, and toxic leaves that seem way overkill for the tiny deer or small parrots you see today. Those traits are basically ghost signatures of missing animals. You're looking at a lock that's lost its key. Places that used to have giant birds wear this the loudest. In New Zealand, giant moa once bulldozed through forests, stripping leaves, swallowing stones, pruning whole plant communities from the ground up. Today, no native land mammals doing that job. Instead, you get introduced deer, goats, and cows clumsily filling the role, chewing different plants, trampling different seedlings, and reshaping an ecosystem that never evolved for hooves. Madagascar's the same kind of story. Elephant birds were like walking bulldozers with beaks, crushing vegetation, spreading seeds in giant, fertilizer-packed droppings. Now, those jobs are split between zebu cattle, invasive pigs, and, honestly, no one at all. Some shrubs and trees still make absurdly big fruits that nothing local really handles well. It's an economy running on a bunch of missing workers. And here's the weird part. To you, this feels normal. You grew up in a world where the biggest land animals are almost always mammals, where birds are mostly small, skittish, and airborne. But zoom out, and this is just a late-stage snapshot, taken after a long series of extinctions quietly deleted entire categories of giants. If you'd visited Earth 5,000 years ago, your baseline for normal would have been completely different. So, once you realize that, conservation starts to look less like saving what's left and more like managing a crash site. Rewilding projects that bring in big herbivores or even talk about stand-ins for lost megafauna suddenly make more sense, because they're trying to plug holes in ecological jobs that giant birds and other megafauna used to handle for free. But that also dumps a responsibility right back on you. We ended the age of giant birds. Are we okay being the permanent full stop on that entire evolutionary experiment? Or do we try, in some way, to restart the conversation between big bodies, big plants, and big landscapes? Hold that thought, because the next question is even messier. What happens when we start playing giant maker ourselves? So, let's imagine the universe hears that question and answers it. You blink, and you wake up tomorrow on a parallel Earth where we did not end the age of giant birds. Terror birds, moas, elephant birds. They never went extinct. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of feathered megafauna. Plus you, trying to get to work on time. You might think the streets would look basically the same, but what you actually find are traffic lights with extra signals for birds. Your car? It now has a reinforced roof and shatterproof windshield because a 2-meter terror bird sprinting at 60 kilometers an hour is not just a bird strike, it's a full-on feathery truck. School zones have flashing signs that don't just say, "Watch for children." They say, "Watch for nesting females." One bad U-turn, and you're in the middle of a very angry Amoa daycare. Daily life gets weirdly tactical. Jogging in the park now means checking the app that tracks nesting territories the way you'd check the weather radar. You time your grocery run so you're not passing the wetlands at dusk, when elephant birds wander across the highway like walking boulders. Cities hire mega bird rangers, part wildlife biologist, part riot police, whose whole job is breaking up human terror bird disputes before somebody gets kicked through a fence. And culture? Culture goes completely off the rails. Extreme sports channels run Sprint the Gauntlet, where adrenaline addicts try to outrun juvenile terror birds in padded armor, while commentators argue whether that one nibble counted as a tag or an attempted disembowelment. Nature documentaries obsess over these giants the way ours fixate on lions. Slow-motion shots of an elephant bird bulldozing through a forest, a moa rearing up 3 meters high to strip branches, a terror bird doing that unsettling head tilt straight into the camera. Food gets complicated. One elephant bird egg could feed a family reunion, so every debate show is yelling about whether hunting and egg collecting should be legal. Some countries build entire cuisines around farmed giant bird meat. Others treat them like sacred relics of deep time. You walk past a restaurant proudly advertising ethical moa omelets, and right next door is a protest line with signs saying, "Respect the survivors of the dinosaurs." See, living next to something that big, that obviously ancient feeling, changes how nature feels. You can't pretend ecosystems are small or fragile in an abstract way when a 300-kilogram beak missile occasionally blocks your commute. every policy meeting, every land use argument has a literal giant bird in the room, reminding you that evolution can build monsters if you give it space and time. So, would we treat them more carefully if we'd never driven their cousins to extinction? Or would we just repeat the same story, this time with bigger feathers and better cameras? Hold that question, because to answer it, we have to look at what actually happened the first time we met these giants, and how fast they disappeared. So, what did that first encounter with giant birds actually teach us? When you zoom out, the pattern is weirdly simple. Every time Earth clears space at the top of the food chain or strips away big land predators, birds move in, put down their wings, and start getting huge. Right after the dinosaurs went down, you might think mammals instantly took over, like they were just waiting backstage. But what you actually find in the fossil record is a long, awkward gap where big, fast, land-hunting mammals are rare. In that quiet window, you get terror birds in South America hitting 3 meters tall, with 70-centimeter skulls built like sledgehammers. For tens of millions of years, apex predator meant feathers. The same script plays out on islands. See, when you drop flying birds onto a big island with no native land mammals, the rules change overnight. No saber-toothed cats, no wolves, no hyenas. So flight stops being a life-or-death superpower and turns into an expensive luxury. Birds like the moa in New Zealand and elephant birds in Madagascar arrive by air, then slowly trade wings for legs, hollow bones for dense ones, and speed in the sky for sheer bulk on the ground. That's the evolutionary pathway in a loop. Birds fly in, predators are missing, food is everywhere, so flight becomes optional, then useless, then gone. Once they're stuck on the ground, natural selection starts cranking up the volume. Bigger legs to reach more plants, bigger necks to browse higher, bigger beaks to crack tougher food or punch through bone. And yes, these guys are all real, not concept art from a What If Dinosaurs Had Feathers fan forum. Why did it work so well? Because the environments that made giant birds were usually stable and productive. Warm or mild climates, rich forests or grasslands, oceans delivering nutrients like a conveyor belt. With fewer big mammals competing or hunting them, a 600-kilogram elephant bird or a sprinting, horse-sized terror bird wasn't ridiculous, it was efficient. So, what killed the party? First, mammals finally caught up. Large cats, dogs, bears, and hoofed herbivores spread out of their original strongholds and into the same spaces birds had been owning. Climate swings reshaped habitats, shrinking the safe, predictable zones where a slow-breeding giant bird could thrive. Then humans show up and speed-run extinction with fire, spears, and egg collecting. But these birds weren't evolutionary mistakes that failed. They were incredibly successful designs that dominated their worlds until the rules of the game changed. Let's imagine waking up in that world again. 3-meter birds hunting where lions hunt now, forests patrolled by beaks instead of claws. That's not fantasy. This is the world of Earth's recent past. So, when we talk about losing them, we're really talking about how our species walked into a planet ruled by giant birds and pulled the plug. The real question is, how do we know this story so clearly, and how fast did it all unravel once we arrived? So now that you've walked through a planet ruled by beaks, I want to throw this back at you. If you could bring one of these giant birds into the modern world, which one are you actually picking? Let's imagine you get a resurrection budget for exactly one species. Are you going full chaos and voting for a terror bird, 3 meters tall, sprinting around like a feathered T-Rex with an axe for a face? Are you Team Elephant Bird, basically a living boulder from Madagascar, heavier than a horse and stomping through the forest like a slow, confused tank. Or maybe you want a giant moa, 3.5 meters of plant-eating fluff on stilts, or the demon duck of doom, an Australian goose that looks like evolution tried to build a rhino out of poultry. Drop your pick in the comments and tell me why. Is it because you want to see one in a zoo, or because you secretly want to watch a terror bird chase a modern ostrich and see who regrets evolution more? You might think it's an easy choice, but what you actually find when you picture it in detail gets weird fast. Follow-up question. Would you really want to live in that world? Not a CGI documentary, not a video game. You, walking your dog, and a 600-kilogram elephant bird just exists somewhere in the nearby countryside. Are you cool with moas raiding your vegetable garden? With demon ducks lurking in wetlands you hike through? Or is this only fun from the safe distance of fossils, museum glass, and special effects? See, it's one thing to say, bring back terror birds, and another to realize they'd need huge hunting ranges that currently contain, cities. So tell me where your line is. Wild and roaming? Only on remote islands? Only in fenced reserves? Or hard no, keep the murder ostriches in the past. And while you're down there, I want to hear your local stories. Does your culture have legends of thunderbirds, rock birds, giant man-snatching eagles, or sky monsters that carry people away? Describe them. Name them. Because when you line up myths from New Zealand, Madagascar, the Americas, Australia, and beyond, this is the world of global megabird memories leaking through folklore. If this episode made you see birds, dinosaurs, or normal nature differently, hit like so. The algorithm doesn't drive these lost worlds extinct twice. Subscribe if you want deep dives into things like island gigantism in other animals, the Great American Biotic Interchange that let terror birds invade the north, or full breakdowns of specific lineages we only flew past here. And yes, these guys are all real. Share this with someone who still thinks pigeons are the default bird, and then stick around, because next we're going to pull apart how we actually know any of this happened in the first place. So, let's imagine we cut back to that first valley we dropped you into at the start. Same camera move, same low morning light. You might think you're about to see a terror bird step out of the mist again, but what you actually find is just wind in the grass, a few small songbirds flicking between bushes, and a hiking trail sign with a faded "Watch for Snakes" warning. You're standing where a 3-meter Forus racid once sprinted things into extinction. The ground you're on used to shake with every step of a 300-kilogram bird swinging a skull the size of your torso. Now, the loudest thing here is a distant truck on the highway. The top predator is probably somebody's off-leash dog. Cut. Madagascar forest. It looks normal at first, just dense green and that heavy, humid air. Then we ghost in a reconstruction of an elephant bird over the footage, scaled correctly, just to be rude. This thing is so huge it almost doesn't fit in the frame. Over 600 kilos of walking egg factory, quietly bulldozing through the understory. And then we fade it out, leaving only lemurs and a plastic water bottle someone dropped on the trail. New shot. A New Zealand valley. Today it's sheep, ferns, a drone buzzing overhead. Overlay a female giant moa, 3+ meters tall when she stretches, browsing leaves above the sheep like they're lawn ornaments. For a second, your brain tries to accept it as normal, because the landscape actually fits her. Then she dissolves, and the hill goes back to looking a little too empty. Australian wetlands next. Egrets, ibises, maybe a bored pelican. Now stack in a dromornis, a thunderbird, as tall as a person and way, way heavier, looming out of the reeds. This is the world of what-ifs. One by one, the giants blink out, but the camera keeps rolling. See, the weird part is how close we were to keeping that version of Earth. Nudge the asteroid a little smaller, give mammals a slower start, or have a few human populations hunt just a bit less aggressively, and you might actually meet a giant bird in real life instead of in a museum. The line between world of feathered tanks and world of pigeons on power lines is ridiculously thin. So next time you see a sparrow on a sidewalk or a pigeon doing its weird chest puff walk, try to see them as what they really are: tiny survivors of an age of feathered super heavyweights. Your chicken nuggets? Direct descendants of animals that once muscled mammals out of the top predator job. And evolution isn't done. Given enough time, enough empty niches, and a few lucky breaks, the giants of the future could come back looking bigger, stranger, and way less bird-shaped than you're expecting. The real question is, how on earth would we ever know that was starting to happen? So, how would we ever know it was starting to happen? Honestly, it might look just as ordinary as a chicken pecking around your backyard. You might think you're living in a pretty tame version of Earth, but what you actually find, once you zoom out across 66 million years, is a planet that keeps reinventing giant, feathered nightmare like it's a favorite hobby. First, thank you for sticking with this whole journey. You've jumped continents, watched dinosaurs crash, seen terror birds sprint like feathery velociraptors, and met elephant birds that made ostriches look fun-sized. That's a lot of deep time to cram into one video, and the fact that you're still here means your brain is at least part paleontologist now. See, the big idea hiding under all these huge birds is pretty simple. The world you know is just one version of Earth. On another Earth, South America keeps its terror birds, Madagascar never loses its elephant birds, and New Zealand's giant moa are still browsing in the forest while confused tourists take blurry photos. Same planet, totally different cast. When you learn about those lost giants, you're not just collecting weird trivia about oversized poultry. You're actually getting a clearer mirror for our own time. Who's filling the giant browser job now that moa are gone? What predators stepped in when terror birds checked out? And what happens to our ecosystems if the big animals we still have follow them into the fossil record? Let's imagine you keep that what-if switch turned on. What if mammals hadn't muscled back in? What if flight never re-evolved in some lineages? What if humans had shown up 1,000,000 years earlier? Or 1,000,000 years later? Asking those questions doesn't change the past, but it does something better. It trains you to see how fragile and temporary every version of Earth really is, including ours. So, if you want to keep going, we've got you. Check out our episodes on other prehistoric giants, from polar sea spiders the size of dinner plates to whales that accidentally reinvented being sea monsters. Or dive into the really strange stuff: evolutionary dead ends, islands where rodents turned into hippo-sized herbivores, and ecosystems where birds tried to be mammals and kind of pulled it off. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of deep time, where evolution keeps throwing weird ideas at the wall just to see what sticks. If you want to see what it comes up with next, stay curious. Keep asking, what if? And remember, every bird is a tiny dinosaur, every footprint is a time machine, and you're living on a planet that never stopped experimenting.